In this video, I'm going to show you how to get Emudeck up and running on a Steam Deck with optional plugin support. The Steam Deck is a fun little handheld PC with tons of capabilities for playing modern games as well as retro emulation, all the way up to PlayStation 3, though don't expect that last one to be super perfect considering the emulator isn't as developed as other ones, as well as just requiring a lot of power. But regardless of the point, the Steam Deck is just a portable powerhouse and one that has been a ton of fun to mess with, and today I'm going to show you how to get Emudeck set up on it as well as optional plugin support. So let's go ahead and dive in. Now to get started, you need to have a Steam Deck, of course. And I recommend getting a micro SD card to put into your Steam Deck so that way you aren't wasting your internal drive space, because users of the basic 64 gig one won't have a lot of space left over. And if you want to have a bunch of modern games as well as your retro games, hey, that's a great reason to have it. So as an example, I already have 300 gigs of ROMs put on this SD card just so we don't have to wait on transfer times, and you can see that it is just taking up a good chunk of space. We're going to start with some optional steps here to get plugins up and running. Again, this is optional. You could skip over this entire section and just go straight to Emudeck if you don't want plugin support, but I do recommend it because it lets you manually control core counts in Dolphin and Yuzu, which helps improve the performance in those cores. So the first thing to do is to press your Steam button and go to Settings, and then go down to System and enable Developer Mode. And then from here, scroll all the way down to the bottom, and we need to enable CEF Remote Debugging. And it'll ask you to restart your Steam Deck, so yeah, go ahead and restart it. And once your Steam Deck has finished rebooting, either hold down your power button to access the power menu here, or you could press your Steam button and go down to the power option, and switch over to desktop mode. And after your Steam Deck has booted into desktop mode, just navigate down here to your taskbar and open up your system settings, because we need to set a user password if you haven't done so already. So click on the Users tab, and you'll see that you have your Steam Deck username, account type. So just click on Change Password and type in a password of your choice. You can press Steam plus X to bring up the virtual keyboard, and you could just go ahead and type one out. And then it will ask you if you want to change your wallet password. You could choose to do that if you want to, not mandatory. But once that password has been changed, you could just go ahead and close out of the user settings. Now, open up an internet browser. You could use Firefox, Edge, what have you. And in the search bar, type in Decky Loader. So you can just hold down Steam plus X to bring up a virtual keyboard again. So, Decky Loader. And that'll bring you, hopefully, to the Steam Deck Homebrew Decky Loader, plugin loader for the Steam Deck. So we're going to go here. And I'll have links to the description below on how to get here as well, so don't worry about having to type any of this stuff in if you don't want to. But you're going to scroll down here to the installation section. And if you've been following along, you've already done all of this stuff. So all we need to do is go to step 10 here and copy the install command. And then I'll just minimize this real quick. But now we'll just open up our start menu here. And we're going to go to System, Console. And we're going to paste that install command into our console window here. So if you don't have a keyboard hooked up to your Steam Deck, you can use the virtual keyboard, but you might want to hook up an actual keyboard to make it so your life is a little bit easier. I'm using the virtual keyboard just to show you that it can all be done without one, but it is definitely a lot nicer if you have one. And then it's going to ask you for your Steam Deck's password, so go ahead and get it entered, and the install process will move on from that point. And once the install is completed, you can just go ahead and close out of the console window for the moment. And if you click on your Dolphin file manager, you'll see you have a new homebrew folder within your just home menu here. And this is where we can now place plugins and other things to modify the way our Steam Deck runs. And this will be important as we install Emudeck. But once you have that optional plugin loader ready to go, we can go back into our internet browser, go to the address bar, and type in emudeck.com. And we're just going to click on the download tab here, and download the latest installer. And it's going to give you a pop-up that says remember to copy and execute the installer from your desktop, so just press OK on that if you get that notification. But I'm going to open up my downloads folder. Minimize my internet browser here, and I'm going to copy it to the desktop. And there we go. And now I'm just going to run it, and we're going to be greeted by the new install GUI. This will start the program install Emudeck. Continue. So just let it download all the stuff it needs to run. And there we go. Here is our new GUI. And after it finishes downloading everything it needs to run, you're going to be greeted by the install screen here. So welcome to Emudeck. Please select how you want to set up your device. There is an easy mode and a custom mode. So easy mode sets a bunch of stuff for you automatically. It's the quickest way to get set up and running, but it doesn't let you configure things the way that you might like. So in my guides, I always go the custom route, and this is no different. So I am going to select custom mode and show you this process. So going to hit continue once I have done that. Now it's going to ask you where you want to install your emulation folder, so you could do internal storage or an SD card. Again, I recommend an SD card just for ease of use. If you've modded your Steam Deck to have a big internal SSD, go for internal storage, doesn't really matter. Or you could set your own custom directory. But we're just going to go with a default SD card installation. It works, it's nice. Next. Now we're going to choose our device. We have the Steam Deck. And now it's going to show us which emulators are available to download. So we want Retroarch, we want Dolphin. If you're planning on doing Prime hacks, you could choose that one. I'm not, so I'm not going to. I'm going to do standalone PPSSPP. I don't really use DuckStation, so I'm not going to grab that one. Citra, yes. PCSX2, yes. RPCS3, yes. Yuzu, yes. I don't use Ryujinx, so I'm not going to worry about that one. Cemu, yes. The Cemu, yes. Not going to worry about MAME. I don't need Scum. Vita 3K, that's a new one for this version of Emudeck, so I'm going to go ahead and grab that one and show you how to get that set up as well. And there we go. And that's going to ask us if we want to update any of the emulators configuration files. So if you were updating your install, you would choose which ones you want to do, but we're just going to go ahead and let them all reset to default because this is a new install. Now this next screen, if you have a Retro Achievements account, you can enter your username and password and enable hardcore mode. So I have a Retro Achievements account, I'm really into this. So I'm going to enter my info in here. And once you have that information set, just go ahead and hit continue. Now this next screen, you can enable game bezels for 8-bit and 16-bit systems. So for example, on Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, you can have a little like mimic screen for the Game Boy. So you can choose if you want these on or off. It shows you which systems these will apply to. So for this install, let's go ahead and leave them on. Sure, why not? Now, aspect ratios for Sega games. Sega Genesis is notorious for some interesting aspect ratios. So you could do classic 4:3 or a 3:2, and it'll apply to the following systems. So I am used to 4:3, so that's what I'm going to stick with. If you want less black bars, but a little bit more distortion, you could go with a 3:2. And now for the NES and SNES, you could choose between 4:3 or 8:7. So the SNES actually had an 8:7 aspect ratio, but your TV likely changed it to 4:3, so personal preference on that one. I prefer 4:3. You choose what works for you. Now this next screen is for Dreamcast and N64 games. You can choose between using original 4:3s, or you can use 16:9 widescreen hacks. I'm not the biggest fan of widescreen hacks using this method, so I choose 4:3, but do whatever works for you. And then the same thing for GameCube. I like 4:3 on this as well because the built-in Dolphin widescreen hack is pretty glitchy, so it's not really recommended to use it. If you want to use widescreen hacks on Dolphin, manually set up some widescreen codes. Next up, LCD shaders for handheld systems. So this will apply to Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Gear, and Neo Geo Pocket. So if you want to have an LCD filter, you could turn it on or off. Next, CRT shader for classic 2D games. So if you want to have a CRT shader, you can choose to turn this on or off. You can always manually set shaders up in Retroarch yourself as well, but this gives a nice, easy setup that gives you a pretty good result. And then the same thing for more 3D systems like PS1, Dreamcast, Saturn, and N64. So you can choose to have it on or off. Next up, your emulation station themes. So there's Epic Noir, RB Simple, or Modern. I prefer Simple myself, so that's what I'm going to choose. And now it's just going to go through and do the install process, so just bear with it while it does its thing. And after everything finally gets downloaded and installed, you'll see an installation complete screen here with tips on how to add in your games. So I'm going to go over this in more detail in just a moment. And then if you swipe right on your screen, you'll see tools and stuff that a new menu will be added if you run the Emudeck installer again, which is what we're going to do right now. And if we keep scrolling right, you'll see that they've added an emulation folder. This is where we're going to put our ROMs, BIOS, saves, storage, and then BIOS paths, then hotkeys, and Steam input profiles, which we'll cover a little bit more as we need to. And then a little bit more info on using Emulation Station or Steam ROM Manager, which we will also go over again in just a moment. But anyway, go ahead and click on Exit. And you'll notice that the new Emudeck installer doesn't give you a ton of new items here, which is fine. Just run Emudeck again. It'll check for updates. And now we are going to go down here to the Tools and Stuff button and select it. And we're going to install Power Tools. And it's going to ask you for your Steam Deck's password. So just enter that in and click on Install Power Tools. And once you get the notification up here that Power Tools has been installed, go ahead and go back and install the Gyro DSU. So same thing, just go ahead and enter your Steam Deck's password and click on Install Gyro DSU. And then once you have the Gyro DSU installed, you can just go back again. And now we're just going to go ahead and close out of Emudeck for a moment and work on setting up our ROMs and BIOS files. Over on my channel, I have a playlist showing you how to back up a number of systems, BIOS files, and games if you so choose, if you happen to have a physical collection of that stuff. Otherwise, you're going to need to use Google. Don't ask me for illegal download links because I will not be giving them to you. But once you have your files sourced, you need a way to get them onto the Steam Deck. If you just went the Google route and got everything just downloaded automatically to your Steam Deck, awesome. If not, you could rely on a network transfer, or you could copy things over to a USB drive formatted that will be recognized on a Windows, Mac, and Linux PC if you don't have two Linux PCs. But if you want to do a network transfer from your PC, I'm going to show you a quick way of getting it set up. I'm only going to show Windows. I don't use Mac or Linux regularly, so I can't show you the steps for those. But find the folder that has your emulation stuff in it. So, for example, here's mine. And it has everything I need in it, like BIOS files and games and just everything. But anyway, I'm going to right-click on this folder. I'm going to click on Properties, Sharing tab, Advanced Sharing, Share this folder, share folder name, I'm going to leave it as Emulation. And now under Permissions, and then if you want to, you can click on Full Control for the Everyone user, so that way it'll just apply the share, and then you can just press OK. And then press Apply to share the folder. And then we can close out of that. And then again, if we go in, sharing, we'll see, hey, this is the network path for our share. There we go. All right, so pay special attention to that network path. So you'll see / your computer name / your share name. So when we do our file share on the Steam Deck, you're going to be asked to enter in a server and a folder. So the server is your computer name. So for me, that is The Revolution. That is what I named my computer. If you didn't manually rename your computer, it's probably going to be something like desktop, blah, 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 blah. And then the shared folder is my emulation folder. So that is that is behind the / after my PC name. And then underneath all of that, you will see password protection. If it says that you need to have a user account and password to this computer to access shared folders, that just means you're going to enter in your Windows login information when you create the folder on Steam Deck. So for many of you out there, that'll just be your Microsoft account, username, and password. But now over on your Steam Deck, if you open up the Dolphin file browser, click on Network, and it'll bring you to this screen. And up at the top here, click on Add Network Folder, Microsoft Windows Network Drive, next. So just create a name that you want to have for this share. So I'm just going to put Emulation. And then server, I'm going to type in my computer name. And then for folder, I'm going to type in emulation again, because that was the name of the folder share. And now I'm going to click on save and connect. And now it's asking me for my username and password, so I'm going to enter in my Microsoft account login info, and it should pop up the file share. And hey, look at that, it brought up my emulation folder that I shared over the network. And now anytime I go back to the network page, I can click on my emulation folder, and there it all is. But I already copied all of this stuff over to the Steam Deck prior, so that way we don't have to worry about network transfer times. Let's go ahead and get our games placed where they need to be. So if you open up your Dolphin File Manager and scroll down to your SD card under here in Removable Devices, Primary, you'll see we have a new emulation folder, and inside we have a BIOS folder and a ROMs folder. So this is where all of our games need to go, and you'll see that there are different folders for every system you could think of. So over on the Emudeck GitHub page, there are a number of listed file types that are supported for every system, so just make sure that your games are in one of these formats before you place them in the folders. And I'll have a link to this page in the description below, so that way you can see it. But anyway, I already have my ROMs placed correctly within these folders in a different directory. So I'm just going to open up a new instance of this. And I have a ROMs folder here that I have all those games in. So as you can see, I have my 3DO games here. They are all in CHUD format. But I'm just going to cut everything out and paste it into its proper place. And I'm just going to do this with every system. Now for Wii U is when things get a little bit different. There's actually another ROMs folder within the Wii U folder because all of Cemu's files are actually in the Wii U folder. So when you're copying your Wii U games, make sure that you go into the Wii U folder, go to the second ROMs folder, and then place your Wii U games inside that one. So I also want to make note that I have my Wii U games in two different formats. I have a compressed WUD file, and then I also have extracted game files here for Twilight Princess HD and Breath of the Wild. Both work, but disk images do require that you have a special keys.txt file, so that way they can be read by the emulator. But we'll go over that more in a second. Now, just another quick note here on multi-disc games that you're going to be running in Retroarch, so anything on Sega Saturn, PlayStation, Sega CD, etc., etc. You want to make an M3U file for those specific games. That way you could do disk changes a lot easier within Retroarch. So making an M3U file is actually really easy. You just create a new text file, and you can name it whatever you want. So this is just an example, so I already have one, so I don't need to name it anything else again, but then you enter the text document, and then just copy the file name of all the discs included with that game. And you just repeat this with all the discs that are part of that game. And then when it's done, you just save it. And then just rename it with a .m3u extension. And then you now have that M3U file to be a multi-disc game, so I'm just going to delete this because I don't actually need it. And once you have finished placing all of your game files, we can move on to BIOS Setup. So back out into your emulation folder and enter the BIOS folder. So this BIOS folder is where you're going to dump all the BIOS files you need for each individual system. So we're going to start off with Retroarch here, because this is going to be your Retroarch system folder, so you just need to place BIOS files within this folder as Retroarch would expect to see them. So if you need help with specific BIOS files naming and placement, you can head over to the Retroarch website, go to their docs page, and they have a listing for all of the systems and all the BIOS information for those systems that you could click on. So for example, if we click on 3DO, it shows us a list of all the BIOS files and what they should be named. So 3DO can have a bunch of different BIOS files, but basically you just need one main system BIOS, and then some optional ones if you're running Japanese games. But then you could do that for other systems as well. So for example, we could go to Dreamcast, and it shows us that we need to have a DC folder with a DC_boot.bin file, and then if you wanted to add the Naomi BIOS files and stuff like that in there as well, you can do so. But just from the systems I cover, for example, we got Dreamcast. There's a little bit more in this folder than you would normally see because I actually have VMU save files in here already. But my DC folder, my Neo Geo CD folder, CDI folder, Atari 5200 ROM, Sega CD US ROM, Nintendo DS BIOS files and firmware file. exec.bin and grom.bin are for Intellivision. GBA BIOS. IPL.bin is actually for GameCube. I haven't gotten GameCube to do its boot animation through Steam Deck yet, so I'm not really going to cover this more specifically at the moment. Link's boot image. The MCPX_1.0.bins for Xbox. We'll cover that more here in a second. But MPR, that's Sega Saturn. Panasonic 3DO. That's another Xbox one. We'll cover that in a bit. These are PS2 BIOS files. We'll cover those in a second. But then we also have PS1 BIOS files, TurboGrafx CD BIOS file, and then a sound font for DOS games. And that's all for the cores that I'm going to be running through Retroarch. So we're just going to move all of these over. And that handles all of the BIOS files for the systems I run through Retroarch. Again, if you have more systems that you're going to be running through Retroarch, this is your Retroarch system folder, so just follow the file system outlined in the docs page. And use Google or one of my provided videos on how to dump your BIOS for a specific system on how to obtain them. Now for PlayStation 2, you do need to have a PS2 BIOS for PCSX2 to run. I actually have 2 BIOS files in here for PS2. Doesn't matter, you only need one. But I have guides on the channel showing you how to back up a PS2 BIOS from a fat or slim console, so just do that or use Google once again to get your PS2 BIOS files, and then just dump them into that BIOS folder as well. Now for original Xbox, you need to dump an MCPX bin file and a BIOS file to get Xbox to run. And once you have those dumped, you could just move them into the BIOS folder. Now there is one more file we need for original Xbox to work correctly, and that is a hard disk image for the original Xbox. So there is one within the required files folder of the Cemu webpage where you could download a pre-formatted hard drive image. So this won't have a dashboard or anything on it, but that's okay. So just save the file. And once that file is finished downloading, just get it extracted. Just tell it to extract here. And now go back over to your BIOS folder over here and back out to the main emulation folder. And now locate the storage folder, Cemu, and copy the hard drive image into it. So I'm just going to cut and paste. There we go. Original Xbox is mostly set up. We have to manually change some things if you have a BIOS file named differently than what it's expecting, and I'll show you that here in a bit. Let's talk about Nintendo Switch. You need prod.keys backed up and boot1 and boot0 backed up from your Switch. So go into the Yuzu folder here, and then just cut the product keys into the keys folder. And then go into the firmware folder and place your boot 0 and boot 1 in here. Remember, don't overwrite the folders because they are symlink to another directory, and if you override them, you'll destroy the symlink. And we are almost all set on the BIOS front. There is one more system that we need to do some initial setup for, and that is PlayStation 3. So to get RPCS3 up and running, we need to have the PlayStation 3 system software update downloaded onto our Steam Deck so we can install it into the emulator. So head over to PlayStation.com, PS3 system software, and download the PS3 update. Again, link will be in the description below for easier access. And for some reason, Sony stuff shows up as a security risk, so just tell it to allow the download. Alright, and once that download has finished, just go back into your emulation folder, click on the tools folder, and you'll see a launchers folder right here. So click on that, and then find RPCS3, and tell it to execute. And this will boot up the RPCS3 emulator. Click on File, Install Firmware, go to your Downloads page, and choose the PS3 update. And then it will get it all installed. So just wait for it to do its thing. And once that install's finished, you can close out of RPCS3. Next, let's get Vita set up. So the new Vita 3K emulator executable is Vita 3K, so just go ahead and open this up. And you'll notice that it tells you to download firmware and download firmware font packages. When I've tried to use this method, it has resulted in absolutely nothing usable. So if you're like me and these easy download buttons don't work, you're just going to have to open up your web browser and go to the Vita 3K Quick Start Guide, and they have the firmware packages linked here as well. And this will be down in the YouTube video description as well. But we're just going to download the Vita system updates onto our Steam Deck. And they throw up security alerts again, so just keep anyway. And then going back to that Quick Start Guide, we have another firmware package that we need to download, so I'm just going to click on that to download it as well. And it's also angry, so we're just going to keep it anyway. There we go. So there's the two firmware update files that I need for this process. So now back in Vita 3K, over here on the left, top left of the menu, if you click on this, you'll see an install firmware button. So click on that, go to your downloads page, and we're going to install the PS Vita update first. Installation in progress, please wait. And firmware successfully installed. Cool, so we could delete the installation file automatically, which is nice. And then same thing again, we're going to go up, install firmware, and we're going to install the PSP2 update. And we can tell it to delete that one as well. So there we go. So now we could uncheck the show next time here, or not. Could just freeze up. That's cool. It's selecting the stuff on the background. That's fun. Anyway, I'm going to restart the emulator, so I'm just going to close out of it and open it back up. And now when we enter it, we have a much nicer looking experience here. So you can see that it's just a lot cleaner. So there we go. Close out of that. Unfortunately, this menu is still kind of problematic for me, but whatever. So I'm going to create a user. And unfortunately, the backspace button doesn't work by default here. So I'm just going to select the text. And now enter my username. And friggin' Steam. Steam is so self-centered. Look at that. Look at that. Ruined the whole thing. There we go. And confirm. And if you have a profile picture you want to set, you can choose that here as well, but I don't, so I'm not going to worry about it. And I'm going to have it automatically log into this user. And it froze. Lovely. Very experimental emulator, as you can tell. Yeah, that is frozen solid. All right. Can't even close it. Good stuff. All right, there we go. That's better. So now when we log in, look at that. We've got all of our stuff. And look, it's actually loading up the menus now. Good. All right, so we got it working finally. Huzzah. And now you can take the opportunity to make sure your other emulators are configured like Xbox. depending on how your BIOS is named, it might not be configured right off the bat, like here, for example. So you could just go up into Machine, System, thank you. And I need to change the location of my BIOS file because mine is not named like that. So I need to add it to retail 4034 bios.bin. And there we go. And now if I load it back up, I should get my Xbox boot animation and good to go. But since I didn't choose a game, it will just error because the hard drive doesn't have a dashboard. But there we go. And then same thing with PCSX2. We can execute the app here. And we can go up to Settings, BIOS, and choose our available BIOS file. If you only have one, you don't have to worry about it. It should select it automatically. But I'm just going to choose my fat PS2's BIOS because it shows up in English, and for some reason my Slim is showing up as a Japanese, which is weird. But I'm just going to close out of that now. If you are interested in running PS2 retro achievements, you can also enter your login info here because that does not get set during initial PCSX2 setup with Emudeck. So just go over to Settings, go down to Achievements, enable your achievements, you can enable Hardcore mode, and then just enter your login info here. And then once you finish entering it, just click Login, and you'll see that you are now logged in, and then you can log out anytime you want. And then for Cemu, I still need to place my keys.txt file. I forgot to do this a second ago, but it just goes in Emulation, ROMs, the Wii U folder, and then you just overwrite the original one that was in there, and you should be good to go with all of your product keys that you've added into it. Now, for anybody interested in playing Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, you do need to have the Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild update data installed into Cemu for it to work. So, source a copy of the update data. You could dump it from your own console. You could use the Wii U USB helper, but you need to just get a copy of it. I'm just going to grab mine real quick off of my RetroNAS storage. And just paste it to my desktop real quick. And once you have your Breath of the Wild update data, it needs to be in extracted format like this. And then we just need to copy it into our Breath of the Wild saves folder. So go into your ROMs folder. Find the Wii U folder. MLC01, user folder, title folder, and this is most easily done if you've already tried to run Breath of the Wild and gotten the update error. If not, you will need to manually create a folder that says 00050000. Then go inside this folder, and we need to create one more folder, and it needs to be labeled 101 capital C 9400. And then go inside that folder. And we're going to copy, and we're going to move all of the update files into that new folder. And then just bear with it while it does its thing. And once those files have finished copying, you can head back into your emulation folder, go to the tools folder, the launchers folder, launch Cemu, and then you can try launching Breath of the Wild to make sure that everything is working as intended. And if everything is working, you will be greeted by the game booting up instead of a nightmarish "this game needs a system update" message. Now, just one more thing to note for those of you interested in Wii U emulation on the Steam Deck and tried to install the Steam Deck Gyro DSU plugin through Emudeck's installer. I noticed that mine didn't actually work as intended. It did not actually install the service correctly, so I had to come to the Steam Deck Gyro DSU GitHub page. Scroll down to the install command here, copy it, open up a console window, and then paste it in, and then run it. And it'll ask you for that password you set earlier for root access once it starts going. So just enter that when prompted. And then it'll ask you to restart your Steam Deck after you get that installed, so just go ahead and restart it. And once that reboot's finished, just go ahead and go back to the desktop mode. And we don't need to have that open. But next, we need to grab Cemuhook for our version of Cemu installed with Emudeck. So as always, links to all this will be in the description below for you to easily grab. But we are looking for version 0.5.7.7, and it works for Cemu version 1.25.1 to 1.27.1. And then from here, head into your downloads folder, find the Cemuhook that you just downloaded, get it extracted, then head into your ROMs folder, and navigate to your Wii U folder. And then copy the extracted files into your Cemu folder. There we go. Now just head back out to the emulation folder, go into Tools, Launchers, and launch Cemu. And if everything is running and detected properly, under Options, you'll see a new gamepad motion source, DSU1, and you want to select by slot. And then under Input Settings, you want to change your default profile from Deck to Deck Gamepad Gyro. And just load it. And then you can close it. And then you can test if everything is working as intended by opening up a game you know has motion controls. And thankfully, the latest updates to the gyro have fixed any of my lingering issues that I used to have with Breath of the Wild and other motion-based games. So here we go. Cemu Breath of the Wild, full motion controls. Yay. But after you have your games and BIOS files placed, we can open up Emudeck. Go back down to Tools and Stuff, and we can confirm if our BIOS files are being detected by clicking on the Check BIOS option here. And there we go, it's detected my PS1 BIOS, PS2 BIOS, Switch firmware, Sega CD, Saturn, DS, Dreamcast, all good to go. And if you wanted to compress the games that you have on your Emudeck SD card, you could go to the Emudeck compressor. This will look for things like PS1, 2, Sega CD, Dreamcast games, convert those to CHUD, and then it can also compress GameCube and Wii games into RVZ format. So if you want to save space on your SD card, run the compression tool, and then press OK, let's start. And I've already done this, so it wasn't able to find anything, but that is the process for those of you interested in saving space. And with that, you should be good to go to start running the Steam ROM manager to get everything added in. So just close out of that file system. Now for this next part, we do need to close out of Steam because the Steam ROM manager does get messed up if Steam is running. So just right click on Steam, exit Steam. And if you were using a specific controller profile for your Steam Deck for this part, it's going to change back over to the system level input at this point. So we are going to lose virtual keyboard support, but our right trackpad is still going to be the mouse, our right trigger is going to be left click, and our left trigger is going to be right click. A little backwards there, as you can tell. So to open the Steam ROM manager, head up to the Emudeck executable here. Down to Tools and Stuff, and click on Steam ROM Manager. And then it's going to give you the message about how to add things to Steam ROM Manager. And over here on the left, you'll see that you can expand this tab here. So just go ahead and do that. And you'll see this section here that says parsers. So anything here that is enabled will show up in its own individual section in Steam. So if you just want to have an emulation station entry, you could turn off all of the other ones and just leave on emulation station. which is mostly what I prefer to do. All these systems show up with an emulation station. You can scrape for game title database stuff. So it's a really nice clean look, and it keeps your Steam homepage looking a lot cleaner as well. There is one exception to this, however, and that is PS3 games. RPCS3 is not implemented into Emulation Station by default. There are some workarounds to make it so it can be, but I'm not going to be covering those today. So instead, we're going to use the parser to keep our PS3 games visible within SteamOS itself. So my PS3 games are in extracted ISO PSN format, but it also works if they are installed packages. So I'm just going to disable everything but RPCS3 and Emulation Station, just because I think it looks cleaner that way. But once I have that selected, I'm just going to hit save. And again, if you want to have other systems show up, just leave these on. But once you have the system set the way you want it, head up here to the top and click on Preview. And then tell it to generate an app list. And then it will download some box arts for everything here in just a second, so just be patient with it. My Wi-Fi connection is pretty far away, so it's taking its sweet time. There we go. So now you can choose which banners show up on your Steam Deck. So I like setting my Emulation Station one to Emudeck. I think it looks nice. But then you could just set the banners here for each one. Didn't find one for Resistance, that's funny. But then you could also choose the poster page that shows up, because it's going to be different depending on the position in your last played list. So if you just played a game, it'll be the grid one. That'll show up as the primary image. Otherwise, it'll be the poster one, so then you can just choose which poster you want to have show up. So something like that. But once you have everything set the way you want it to, just save the app list. And then you can just close out of that and reboot into Steam. And inside the library tab, you'll see that there is now a new emulation collection here. Somewhere. There we go. So Emulation Station is now showing up here. And because I kept my PS3 games checked, there will now be a PlayStation 3 playlist here as well. So right here. And that has all my PS3 games in there too. But with that, we're finished with everything on the desktop side of the Steam Deck. So we could just reboot back into gaming mode and enjoy the spoils of our labor. And once your Steam Deck is finished rebooting into SteamOS, you could just head down to your library. You can go to the collections page and find the emulation subcategory or PlayStation 3 subcategory if you want to start playing those games. Or you can find them in the non-Steam section as well. I have a bunch of stuff in here from other computers. I'm kind of annoyed that Steam makes these universal now, but whatever. So I'm just going to start off by going into Emudeck and hit play. Oh, and it has to re-download all my Proton runtimes and stuff because I had factory reset to get the plugins to work. So just wait for it to do its thing if it needs to. And with the latest updates to Emudeck, the Emulation Station theme you set and install actually applies, which is great. And there we go. There's all of our games ready to go. You could then just go into a system, press A on a game, and it should launch it right up. And if you set up that Retro Achievements account, you're good to go there as well. But you can just go through your various systems and make sure everything is working as intended. So, for example, I could try to load up Wind Waker, and if my keys.txt file was detected right, that game should boot right up. And sure enough, here we are. But there you go. How about some awesome Wii U emulation in an actual handheld? Who needs a Wind Waker HD port for Switch? But another thing you might be interested in doing within Emulation Station itself is setting the emulators that are used for each core. So by default, they're set up just to run and run well for every user, but I prefer to use more accuracy-based emulators than some of the ones that it gives. And some emulators I just don't like. Like, I don't like MAME, so I'm going to change this over to Final Burn Neo. I prefer that. Stella's good, Atari 5200's good, Atari Lynx, I'm going to change that over to Beetle Lynx. DOS, make sure that's set to DOSBox Pure because that's the best DOSBox implementation I've ever seen. PC Engine, Super Graphics, TG16. Citra, I'm going to change this over to standalone Citra instead of the Retroarch version. Boopit 64 plus Next, yes. Melon DS, yes. Messin, yes. For Game Boy and Game Boy Color, I like to use Sameboy. Dolphin, make sure GC standalone selected. SNES, I prefer BSNES. Yuzu, Dolphin standalone. Same CDI, this is selected, good. Dreamcast. Game Gear, Master System, Genesis, Saturn. PlayStation, I like to change this over to Beetle PSX hardware. If you install DuckStation, you can set it to DuckStation standalone, PCSX2 standalone, PPSSPP, change that over to standalone, and there we go. And now by default, you just get these game lists that are just set up like this, but if you'd prefer to make that look a little bit nicer, you could head into the scraper menu here, and go into other settings first, because you might want to change this off of Europe if you're not in Europe. So for example, I want US stuff to be prioritized. You can choose systems that you want to scrape data for, and this process can take a while, so I'm just going to do 3DO here just as an example. And I'm going to tell it to start, and it will go through my 3DO games list and apply data to them if it finds it. And since I'm further away from my Wi-Fi, this will take even longer. If it can't find game data for your specific game, you could try renaming the ROM file to closer match the title. I know some of my Atari 2600 games are named very obscurely and it can't find the data for them. And it told me that everything is now complete, but as you can see, it didn't find anything for Need for Speed because the game is actually titled Road and Tracks: The Need for Speed, so it just doesn't know how to look for it there. And it also didn't find anything for Super Street Fighter 2. Not so sure why it couldn't find that one since it's Super Street Fighter 2 Arcade Edition, but whatever. Now when you go in, you can see that you have nice descriptions, player counts, and even a brief demo video showing you how the game plays. So overall, very cool feature. But for basic Emulation Station setup, you are now good to go. You can enjoy any of the systems that you have configured to run within it, and everything should be working really nicely. Now, one more quick note that you all might be interested in. If you press the Steam button on your Steam Deck, you can head over to the controller setting, or not, because it's angry. Okay. And you can view the templates, and they have a template for Cemu, Citra, and then you can customize any controller layouts you want for any specific emulator, just based off the default settings. You don't need to mess with it within the emulator itself. Can be handy, up to you if you want to use it or not. But now I want to give you all just a quick little preview of how to use power tools and how it can be useful. So I have loaded up here Star Wars Rogue Squadron 2 for Nintendo GameCube, and this is one of the more heavy-hitting games in emulation, especially on GameCube. On Steam Deck, the system is powerful enough to pretty much run this game nearly flawlessly just with stock settings. But you will notice at times that the CPU clock rate will fluctuate, so this is one of the things that power tools can help us overcome. And we can also limit the number of cores that are being run because Dolphin doesn't need more than 4, so that way we could get better performance out of pretty much everything. Now, as you can see, my CPU speed has dropped considerably, so this means that I might start to experience dips if I get into more demanding scenes. So I can go into my sidebar here, and one of the first things that we can do is go to the Performance tab, and we could turn on manual GPU clock control, and we could set the CPU frequency to 1600 megahertz, so that way that stays locked and won't give us any problems. Next, if we head down to Power Tools, if we go into Power Tools, we can limit the number of CPU threads that are being used for emulation. So if we lower this down to 4, it should help maintain higher clock speeds. If it doesn't, we can also enable frequency limits on the CPU. And then we can change the minimum frequency all the way back up to the 3500 limit. Now this will kill your battery life and generate more heat, so do be careful while using it. You have been warned. But it will ensure that you actually maintain constant emulation speed as well as the Steam Deck can handle it. And this will be useful for any number of emulation applications. Changing the CPU threads is mostly useful for Dolphin and Yuzu, but it can be useful for other emulators as well, so you can experiment with it as you see fit. And when you're done, you could just turn it back up to 8, and you could disable the forced frequency limits to get battery life back. And then for PS3 games, all you need to do is go to your PlayStation 3 collection and then just choose a game, and it will boot up into RPCS3. But there we go, PS3 emulation up and running on the Steam Deck. As you can tell, it's not the smoothest experience on PS3 games, just because they're much more demanding. The emulator's still technically in its infancy. But it's pretty awesome to see, especially considering this is a handheld PC. And there's other games that will run full speed, which is just pretty freaking cool. But that is going to do it as far as Emudeck setup is concerned. Getting the plugins to work is a bit of an optional step, but definitely worthwhile. And then the Emudeck setup process itself is fairly straightforward. Install the program, get your games and BIOS files placed. I mean, there are some little extra things that are a bit more difficult, like getting the Breath of the Wild update data installed. But overall, not a hard project to do with your Steam Deck, and one that definitely gives it a crap ton more functionality. And I have to say, it all runs really well for the most part. I mean, PS3 is going to have some performance issues because it's a PS3 emulator. It's only got about 60% game compatibility as it is, but the fact that it works at all and is working as well as it is on a handheld computer is pretty impressive. But thank you all so much for making it to the end of this video. I hope that you have found it informative and it helps you get your emulation project set up on the Steam Deck. If you happen to have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments section below, and I'll do my best to try to help you out. But now if you could all do me a couple huge favors here at the end. If you haven't done so already, please hit that like or dislike button depending on how much you like this tutorial. And if you haven't done so already, hit that sub button, notification bell, so you can see when new videos go live on the channel. If you're interested in further helping support the channel, you can also check out that join button here on YouTube or the Patreon link in the bottom right hand corner of the screen. A little goes a long way to keeping this place up and running and bringing this content to you. Big shout out to all of our current backers. Y'all are amazing. Thank you for being our champions and believe in what we do here. But until next time, my wonderful internet peeps, you all stay awesome, keep on gaming, and we'll see you back next video.